Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Joanne Mark Jones, and I'm Head of Content here at Charity Digital. I'll be your host for today's session. Please do introduce yourselves in the chat and let us know where you're joining from today. One thing to mention before I start, Zoe has been experiencing some power cuts in the area, so she may have some connectivity issues. If that happens, I'm going to just try my best to take over, and Zoe will take over from me when she gets back online. So it shouldn't be a problem or too much of a problem. Some other house rules before we crack on is we will share the slides and any resources after the session. So don't worry if you've missed anything. Closed captions are available. To enable these, in the bottom of your Zoom window, click the up arrow button next to closed captions and then click show subtitles. During the webinar, please put your questions in the Q&A section and we'll answer them at the end of the session. And if you like any of the questions specifically, or they resonate with you or relate to anything you're experiencing, click the thumbs up button and that will go to the top of the list, and then we'll get to those ones first. But yeah, please ask loads of questions because we're super enthusiastic to answer those. Finally, if you encounter any sound or image issues, please let us know in the chat and we'll do our very best to get the session back to normal as soon as possible. Right, today's session is about the Charity Digital Code of Practice 2025. The code was originally developed to help to close the digital skills gap in the charity sector. Launched in 2018, the code quickly became invaluable, particularly during the pandemic, as charities adapted to remote working and tried to navigate digital service delivery. Since the pandemic, digital, as you all know, has evolved at a rapid pace. We have witnessed a shift to the cloud, experimentation with blockchain and cryptocurrency, the rise and fall of NFTs, and a growing interest in green technologies. Social media platforms have become a bit more hostile, perhaps more challenging to navigate, and misinformation has become a growing concern. Most significantly, though, the rapid advancement of generative artificial intelligence has changed the way the charities operate. So in short, the code has become more important than ever, and the latest version, as Zoe will explain in today's session, aims to be practical, accessible, and impactful, and reflects the needs of the sector today. So without further ado, Zoe, I'm going to hand over to you.
Thanks, Jan, and hello everyone, and apologies in advance if I do suddenly disappear. Unfortunately, there is a power issue in my area which is also affecting the Wi-Fi. So if I do suddenly drop off, it's down to me, and I will dial back in as soon as I can. And Jan, I'm sure will handle all of it brilliantly. So I do want to say that the code has very much been a team effort. I'm the chair, but so much of this work that you will see us talking about today has absolutely been led by Johan, Jonathan, and Lisa at Charity Digital, and they've done an absolutely fantastic job on it. So I'm really proud of everything that's been created here. So what I'm going to briefly take you through today, fingers crossed the power holds up here, is firstly a little bit of background to the update, just so you've got the context, and you touched on that earlier. I'm just going to say a little bit more about that, and some key headlines about the new version, and then we're going to do something a bit interactive where we talk about how you can influence leaders and trustees. Obviously, the code is very much there as a tool to help you do that. But it'd be good to hear from all of you about where your leaders and trustees are and what they might be saying about digital and, of course, AI as well. What you would like them to do differently, and perhaps we can discuss that a bit, because I'm sure myself and you would be very happy to share our thoughts on that. Then we've also got some advice for you about how to use the code and how to benchmark your progress. And the great thing about the code is that I think it's perhaps a bit more of a versatile tool than people realise. So I just want to share a few things about how I've seen charities use the code in practice. So hopefully that will be helpful for you too. Okay, right, so let's get into this. So Johan gave a really helpful introduction where he talked about how the code was launched in 2018. And what I loved about how you framed that, Johan, is the problem we were trying to solve with digital then looks so different to the landscape and the problem and the opportunities that we're all going after today. So Absolutely. The digital context has changed. I'd say the societal context is very different, especially as we look at some of the really exciting potential, but also some of the risk that comes with AI. And of course, the sector context has changed as well. So one example there is that quite rightly, we're talking a lot more about inclusion now in the sector and societally as well. And that is reflected in some of the changes that we've picked up. I've picked out there, as Eoin mentioned, the arrival of Gen AI. Obviously, within the code itself, we talk about sort of different types of AI. So this isn't just about one form of AI, as you'll see once we get deeper into describing the amends. But that really feels like a watershed moment. And that was very much the point at which we were then able to start conversations with funders, which were very much led by Jonathan and Eoin and the amazing team at Charity Digital. So a huge thank you to WCIT Clothworkers Company, the Resource Alliance, for making the update possible. Because as some of you will know, getting funding for governance in our sector is ironically slightly challenging sometimes. So we are massively grateful to these funders who got behind this and also got what Charity Digital and I were trying to do with the update and why it mattered. Okay, so I just want to say a bit about the process, and yeah, and you might want to chip in here as well if you would like to, because you and your team very much led on this. But what I think worked especially well about the process this time is we were able to really build in lots of opportunities and multiple opportunities for charities to get involved in sharing their thoughts on how the code could help them. So back in 2018, we did some user research as well, and obviously we went out to consultation, but it was on a smaller scale because it was largely me working on it because the code was kind of free floating, as it were, in the sector at that point. But working alongside Charity Digital, there was a multi-step process which began with some user research and interviews, and then kind of two layers of guidance, really, which I think has worked especially well this time, coming from a review board consisting of a brilliant, fantastic group of small and large charities and people working with the sector. And then we also have a steering group, which is organisations such as the Charity Commission and CFG and Akivo on it and WCVA and some others as well. So kind of two different layers of advice and guidance and governance there as well. And we are really, really grateful to all these hundreds of organisations that have got involved in developing this iteration of the code. Also, a big shout out to our code champions because they have been absolutely brilliant at championing the code and getting involved in some cases with input into the code. But these are all organisations who are really moving forward with using the code, which is really exciting. And under Joan's fantastic stewardship, we have a new website for the code and also a new brand as well. So it's a new look, new feel, and different ways of doing things as well. Joan, is there anything that you would like to say about the process for the updates?
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I would mention, and we will share the resources, we published a lot of our user research, basically streamlined it. But we got comment from hundreds of charities, but a lot of them were from a survey, which was very sort of quantitative. And that was kind of like, these are the challenges, direct and everything like that. And then we combined that with a qualitative, which was in-depth, 30 minutes plus conversations with leaders in the charity sector about what and nailing down those points. And we found that really helpful because on the one hand, you had, this is what everyone's problems are, and then we kind of nestled into what the actual problems were in those terms. So yeah, I will share that with everyone now. I'll share it on the chat, but it's a massive document that I personally, from a commissioning point of view from Charity Digital, have found so useful because it tells you what the sector's struggling with right now. So I think it'd be super useful to share, so I'll share that now.
Oh, that's brilliant, Erin. Thank you. And absolutely, that document is a really useful resource. So if you're on the call today and you're an organisation that is supporting charities with how they use digital data tech and AI, or even if you're someone with just a really keen interest in that area, which everyone dialing in inevitably will be, do have a look at that document because I think it's a really rich and interesting source of insight. And you could even get AI to summarise it potentially once you've seen it. So do use that as well. Okay, right. So let's get into what's new for 2025. So obviously the really big change from 2018 is there is much more of a focus on AI now across all areas of the code. So across all the seven principles, it's a bit of a golden thread. And back in 2018, obviously, we were in a completely different generation for AI. As we all know, it has existed for a long time, since the 1950s. But there was kind of a broad reference to emerging tech as a bit of a catch-all term in the 2018 version. And we knew we really needed to up our game this time around and dive into all of the emerging best practice for charities in this area. So we'd encourage charities to have a really good look at that, because there's a ton of stuff in there to help you on the next steps in your AI as well as your digital journey. Other thing that's new for 2025 is that there's a new data principle. So when we first developed the code back in 2018, there were references to data and best practice, but it was quite light touch, and we knew that really needed to be beefed up. And so please do have a look at that. There's obviously the standalone principle now, but it's worth also looking at other references to data through the rest of the code as well, because there's some best practice throughout. A couple of other changes that we made as well. So in the consultation process and in the initial user research, we heard from charities that the code could be quite clunky. The language could be quite jargony. So we were really keen to simplify that this time around and make the code more accessible. And whilst there were two versions of the code, and there still are in the 2025 iteration for small and large charities, we wanted there to be more of a focus on small charities, and also it to be more accessible for small charities, because we all know the sector is very time poor, but small charities even more so, with the multiple hats they're all wearing and the things they're juggling. So that is one of the things that we tried to do as well. Yeah, and have I missed anything there? Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Yeah, a couple of things. I'd say one
Oh,
one I maybe personally liked was the so we had some advice that we introduced on integrating your tech, which I think was super important, because a lot of charities in the user research said they struggled with that element, getting the right tech into their current digital ecosystem. And again, procurement. So tech procurement, because everyone's trying to sell everything to everyone, and there's so many platforms, and it can be quite difficult to make the right decision. So if you have a look through the code, you'll find some information on that. And I thought that was super helpful and completely reactive to voices that we heard in the sector. So that's good.
yeah, that's brilliant. Yeah, that's such a great example of where you and the team responded to those user insights and are really key needs emerging from charities. And I don't know about you, but my LinkedIn inbox is just full of suppliers just constantly trying to sell me things. I'm sure you're the same, and lots of other people on this call will also be of hearing that too. So absolutely, even more of a need to support charities on best practice in procurement. Other thing I should probably have mentioned here, which I might have referenced on previous slides, is much stronger focus on inclusion this time around in the code, both in terms of digital inclusion, but also really reflecting how charities are talking much more about how they take inclusive approaches to digital. So please do look out for those changes in the code too. Hopefully that will help everyone also. Okay, so I thought we'd do something a bit interactive now. So I've talked at you for a few slides, and I'd really like to hear from all of you. So as you know, the code is very much there as a tool for leaders and trustees, but also for people who are influencing leaders and trustees and working with them. We would really like to hear where your leaders and your boards are at. So how are they engaging with digital and AI? You know, what are you hearing from them about it? What are they asking you? So I'd love to hear about that. And then second question, what would you like them to do differently? So do you need more support? Do you need them to skill? Do you need them to take a slightly different approach to investment cases? Have a think about these two questions, and then if you could put your answers in the chat, that would be brilliant. Thank you. Great comments coming through. Thank you, everyone. I'll just give it one more minute and then we'll have a look at these. Thank you. Great stuff here. Thank you, everyone. I'm just going to go through some of these because they're really fascinating and they absolutely chime with a lot of things that both Joan and I will have seen in the charities we work with over the years. They really, really resonate. So we've got a great comment here from Lizzie about setting up a new directorate for data, digital and tech, including AI. And then obviously there's the desire to transform how you work. You're just at the start of the process. So Lizzie, what I suggest there, keeping that momentum up, having really clear phasing, making sure that this directorate has got really clear reporting lines as well, especially around those slightly thorny governance issues. Feels like a really key one. I'm seeing so much in flux at the moment around AI governance across the sector, because it's such a high risk, high reward technology. So that's one thing that I would recommend there. So thank you for sharing that. Clem, you've got a great comment here. You've created an AI policy, includes a lot of comms. So this is really interesting. In fact, this reminds me of I was just with a charity leader this morning, actually. I do think there's a really interesting question we all need to work through, leaders need to work through as well, about how tightly or how broadly you scope your AI policy. My personal view is that we should take a very principle-based approach and that policies need to encompass these different types of use case as well. And that's where I think the principle approach can work really well. But I also understand, here you're clearly focusing on what you're doing a lot. So it might be about what guidelines you wrap around the policy and what kind of training you offer to staff around the policy as much as the policy itself. So thank you, Clemmy. I think that's a great point. Now this really resonates. SMT, I don't know who you are, but I've been in this situation before. Your leadership team, they want to make improvements and prioritise. No specialism or particular expertise on the board. And absolutely, I think that can become quite challenging, can't it? When you have leaders and trustees who, they want to be helpful, they want to provide that strategic steer, but perhaps they don't have the knowledge or the expertise in order to do that. So it might be that offer of some a briefing or some additional support or some mentoring for them potentially might be one to explore. But yes, solidarity SMT, we've definitely all experienced that at some point. Chell, you've got a really great, you're engaging well, excellent, more power to your elbow. That's good. So you're using AI for writing bids for grants, excellent, main issues to do. Yes, so that is something I would also deal with within the policy actually. So look at what guidelines you might want to give. So for example, I know the lottery have got guidance for their staff saying that the way you use AI has to be really meaningful. So just using it for anything and everything, that's where, the environmental consequences, really feel like a particularly strong issue. So yes, I think that's a really key issue for our sector. So we should definitely deal with that within the policy itself. Loads of these comments coming in, so I'm just going to pick out a few things. So yes, Holly, this really resonates, having that headspace. It's a really fascinating one because we saw that in last year's charity digital skills report. And we may see it again this year, who knows. But you're absolutely right. One of the challenges we're seeing right across the sector is that there's just very limited headspace that people have to plan, to strategize, to take a step back and to work out what's going well with digital and AI and how to move forward. And actually, this is where the code could potentially help, because it's a way of structuring that conversation and working through step by step what best practice looks like. So I'll say a bit more about how you can do that in the following slides. Really interesting one that's come up in a few places, that interest and appetite, that desire to engage with digital and AI from boards and SLTs, but perhaps that wariness as well around things like data protection and other risk as well. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, as long as people have the support, leaders have the right support, the right skills to make the right decisions. So I wonder whether it's worth doing something quite kind of practical with your boards and leaders there, maybe to work through some hypothetical decisions that they might need to make, and what would they do and what different factors and criteria they might need to use when they're making decisions like that. Because I think our boards and our leadership teams will have to make increasingly complex decisions about AI as this technology becomes more embedded. Oh wow, there's so many comments here now. Amazing. These are fascinating. Thank you everyone. So this is really helpful. I think this is a really, really good steer. And just of winding things up with Stuart's comment before we have a look at some ways in which leaders and trustees can use the code. I think this is really, really indicative of where a lot of organisations, particularly small charities, are at. That interest in doing a bit more, but that worry about, well, where do we invest our efforts? Where do we focus our budget as well, but also worried about some of these risks that come with, for example, data security and that kind of thing. So yeah, in terms of where to start, I do wonder if the code might be a good way in, and pulling out some of the AI best practice there potentially. So yeah, and I might have to bring you in at some point just to ask how to use the AI bot, because that might be a good way to signpost you to some of that guidance. Brilliant. Thank you, everyone. This is really, really rich. There's so much good stuff here. Thank you. Please do take a moment to read all of those comments, because there's such a great insight into where leaders and the trustees are. And if you're feeling some frustration, or you're feeling that they do need extra support, you're not alone. This is really, really typical across the sector. And this is where we hope that the code will help you. So let's move on and talk a little bit about how to influence leaders and trustees, and then we'll dive into how to use the code a bit more specifically. So some of you may have tried these things already, but these are all kind of tried and tested things we've seen work really well with leaders and boards in charities. So, for example, sharing examples from comparable organisations, and I say comparable organisations because I think if you're, say, a mental health charity, I would be looking at other mental health charities, but also organisations in the mental health space who don't need to be charities, but they could be doing something really interesting in AI, or some kind of really fascinating digital service where you think there are learnings for your charity. So we sometimes in strategy we talk about your competitive set. I know we don't really like to talk about competitors as a sector, and I get that, but looking at who would be in your rear view mirror might be a way to think about it, and setting that lens quite broadly could be a good way to really pick up all those useful examples out there. Also, I think well, way in with leaders and trustees is to lead with the impact on solving business challenges rather than tech challenges. So those who are more tech savvy, leaders who are a bit more advanced skill-wise, will get it straight away. But if it's easier to position, we need a new CRM for these reasons, to do with solving some business goals in your strategy rather than solving a tech challenge, then I wonder whether that could be a good way to get some of these leaders on board, as is obviously the conversation about efficiency during the cost of living crisis. One technique which I think is slightly underrated is hitting your leaders and trustees between the eyes with some insight directly from your audience, directly from users. I think sometimes we're all a bit nervous to do that. And to a certain extent, as a trustee, I mean, you're a very long way from the front line, aren't you? And I think that's one of the challenges in getting them to make really user-centered decisions. So think about the kind of insight you might want to feed up to your board. I do find that boards sometimes respond to stories as much as numbers really effectively, because quite often they'll be really overloaded with more of that quantitative information and accounts and everything like that. So have a think about the stories you can use to influence change as much as the numbers would be my advice. Something that I'm hearing quite a lot from boards at the moment is some of that wariness that some of you talked about. There are a lot of fears, aren't there, in the conversation around AI, and some of these are very good things to explore around data security, and also things like what's going to happen to people's jobs. So I would name the elephant in the room. I would talk about that directly. I wouldn't skirt around it, because that's a really good way in to earn their trust and also to show that you've thought about that. And perhaps also to manage their expectations that this is going to be a bit of a movable feast, because obviously the way in which jobs might look different, and it could just be in terms of how we work. That's what I'm seeing so far right now, rather than numbers of jobs changing in the sector. I think managing expectations on that will be important, because things will inevitably evolve over the next few years. Um, with boards as well, I mean, certainly something I always ask as a trustee is I really want to know what users would think about some of the decisions that we have to make, but also where there might be emerging evidence from where staff have tested, learnt and improved, proof of concept projects and that kind of thing. So I think that is a good thing to do. And then also using the code as a way to start the conversation, because looking at some of your examples there, it's really looking at how to engage those trustees and leaders and just find a way in when these people have so many decisions and things on their shoulders, particularly given the kind of financial climate the sector's obviously working in at the moment. So how can you do that? Well, I'm going to talk about that in a moment. But before I do that, I thought I might just briefly share this leadership framework, which is one of ours, which we've been using recently with leaders actually and with trustees. And really, this framework is way in again alongside the code to get leaders and trustees to think about the kind of characteristics, the hallmarks of what good digital leadership looks like in 2025. So just to explain a bit more about it, there's 4 key characteristics here: confidence, aptitude, understanding and motivation. And then what I've put in the success column is all the behaviours that we see from leaders across the sector in terms of how they provide that really effective digital leadership. So what I'd like to do now is just to give you a few moments, and you can approach this in whatever way you like to. I know we've got some leaders on the call today, so maybe you can tell us in the chat how you think this resonates with your own skill set. Equally, if you're someone who works with leaders, having looked at these criteria, tell me what your leaders are doing well and what they might need to do differently. So I'm going to give that a few minutes, have a think about it, and then pop your answer in the chat, and then we'll see where you're at. You, Joe, you're ahead of the curve. Thank you. Christine, thank you. Just put an excellent comment in the chat, which I think is a really timely, because the level of overwhelm that some charities are dealing with, which I think is so understandable in the current climate, of how you deal with the change that comes with adopting AI more, and all of the sort of shifts that come alongside that, I think is really important, because as you say, it's about tooling, it's also about those ways of working, though, in the way we're all going to work alongside with these tools, which is only going to develop even further as agents come into organizations more. So thank you. I think that's very, very apt. Thank you. Sue, do you put that you're very much the motivated area right now, but with some trepidation? Yes, I think that's very normal as well. Oh, and Lana's got a question about downloading the code. So, yeah, and is there anything that you could advise on that?
Yeah, the download should lead you to the bottom, but we are looking into it. But it's basically it's an anchor, so it'll take you to the bottom of the page, and you should be able to download it from there. So if the anchor's not working, I'll look into that after. If you just scroll to the bottom of the page, you can download from there.
Thank you, and that's really helpful. Cheers. Oh, okay, it's interesting. Charles says we have a charity package with 365, not include co-pilots. Okay, great. Yes, so you're getting more of the tools, and you're looking at how you can use them further. And this is a really great point, because I think there's something about how do we make sure in terms of scaling our use of these technologies, even if we're small organizations, so that the knowledge and the usage doesn't just sit with a couple of people, it's actually being diffused and democratized across the team, and also across volunteers as well. So that is something which I think takes a bit of planning, especially if we loop back to the excellent point we had earlier from Christina about making sure that people don't get overwhelmed by the change. Amazing, great stuff, everyone. Thank you. So this leads us really nicely into my final slide, which is just about how we use the code. So there's really two routes here, I would say. There's a sort of informal versus formal approach. So I'm just going to pick out some points from this slide on how you could do that. So back when the code first got launched in 2018, what we saw some organisations do, and they're probably on the larger side, was to take the code and then ask for basically a kind of mandate from their board to do an organisational assessment against it, and then report back up to the board. So that's one route you could go down, probably more appropriate if you're a larger organisation. Equally, and I think also really valuable, just take one principle and have a look at it in a team meeting. So I've been in the room with charities, whether they're small, whether they're large, where they say, okay, we know we need to improve our strategic approach to digital. Let's just put the digital principle up on a screen where we can all see it, and then let's have a discussion, just as we're doing now, to see, well, are we performing against best practice? What are we doing well? And what could we improve? And what might the actions be for us? So you can go down more of a kind of formal reporting route, or you can just use it in a very light touch way, one principle at a time, to work out where you're at and what you might need to do to move forward. So either of those routes can work really well. And I'm sure there'll be other ways in which you will use the code. So please do let us know how you do that. On a related note, we have some case studies alongside the code. So please do look at those for inspiration, because hopefully that will give you some thoughts on not only how to use the code, but also best practice generally in digital and AI. And then also we do have an AI tool alongside the code, which you can use to pull out some of the AI best practice as well. So, Johan, do you want to say a bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. On the code web page, with the landing page, you'll see on the right hand side, and we'll share that now. It's the code of practice landing page. On the right hand side, there's a ask our AI about anything, basically. And the idea, I think, behind this was that in the initial code of practice, it was quite we wanted to make it as easy to navigate as possible, and to navigate in any way you want to navigate it, not just the sort of read through. So you can download it as a PDF, as some of you have mentioned, but you can anchor it. But also, if you want to skip to the bits you want, you can just ask the AI. It's all the AI's crawled all the content and digested all the content so that it can answer your questions specifically. So ask the AI something, play around with it, and let us know if there's any issues, because we are, as with any AI model, we are tailoring it as we go and making sure it's giving as accurate as possible as information. But yeah, we'll share those links around, and just, I think, as with a lot of AI, sometimes it's best to just have a go with it and see how you feel.
Great, thank you. That's super helpful. Okay, well, hopefully that gives everyone a bit of a steer on the context to the code update, how Code 25 looks very different to Code 2018, some thoughts on how to engage your leaders and trustees, and also how you can use the code in practice. So that's all from me on the slides, but I'm sure both Johan and myself would be really happy to take any questions that you have now.
Yeah. We have a few questions already. The first one I might be able to answer is quite a tough one, actually. I'll read it out. I'm an MSc student researching digital inclusion amidst charities and their beneficiaries. Are there any standardized metrics to measure digital inclusion or maturity for charities? And do we need new ones for the AI divide? Zoe, do you want to touch on that? I'm happy to go first if that would give you a
I think
break.
you should go first. You probably know much more about this than I do. Go
Yeah,
first.
I don't know tons, and it's probably slightly. So digital inclusion is featured in the code, firstly, and actually it was one of the areas I think Zoe mentioned that we did focus on. And in reference to AI, it is becoming more important. I mean, there's a great article, I think it's by Emma Stone, for Good Things Foundation, where she touches on the basically the issue, the widening digital divide that could happen if we don't approach AI effectively. And what that talks about a lot is that AI is obviously trained on people who are solely online. It's trained almost entirely online. And so the people who are offline, or people without access to certain digital tools and the internet and so on and so forth, are actually forgotten from those conversations. The more it drives us, obviously that creates risk. But in terms of actual tools themselves, and the person who answered this, I'm happy to take these questions if you wanted to email us, and we'll give a more effective one. But off the top of my head, I think the minimal digital living standards, that's really interesting. You may have come across it, and it's just basically how you can benchmark in general. And then the other thing to do is look at the Manchester Digital Inclusion Action Plan. And the only reason I suggest that is because they did have some benchmarking within it. But it's really difficult to benchmark digital inclusion because, well, for one reason, there's a bit of a paradox at the heart of it, in that if you're trying to benchmark, you often do that online. So if people aren't online, it's hard to, you'll catch my drift. But the Digital Inclusion Action Plan has some really interesting stuff on benchmarks, but it's also just such an interesting case study of digital inclusion done really well. So yeah, check those out. And we also have a hub on Charity Digital that's dedicated to digital inclusion. And we work with Good Things Foundation, AbilityNet, the Digital Poverty Alliance, and loads of great charities who have helped us inform our content. So there's loads of great stuff there to check out too. And I will put my email, I'll send my email out as well. So if you want to email me that question, I can give a bit of a more in-depth response, because there's someone in my team who's so on it with digital inclusion. So we can maybe help you a bit more. But yeah, is that anything to add to that, Zoe?
Yeah, that's so brilliant, Johan. That's really, really helpful, and definitely do go and look at those metrics. Whoever asked that question, that's a really great question. Some other resources I would suggest, and this is more broadly about useful data on digital inclusion. Lloyd's do really useful. I think it's the Consumer Digital Index. They've got some good data in there about UK-wide stats on digital inclusion, so that's worth looking at as well. Obviously, Good Things Foundation, they are the absolute masters of digital inclusion knowledge, so do have a look at them as well. And just to reinforce what Johan was saying, I think digital inclusion really is rising up the agenda, which is a good thing, because during lockdown it obviously became a real priority for the sector, but perhaps we haven't all been talking about it as much as we could do over the last years, because so many other things have been happening. But absolutely, because of AI, we are going to see more people who are disconnected from digital and not properly served by AI as well. So thank you for raising that. I think that's a really key issue for us in civil society, and also just societally generally as well, a real issue for our times.
Yeah, bro. Yeah, thanks so much, Zoe. Thanks for the question as well. It's a great question. And yeah, the next question is quite a classic one. What are the first practical steps you would take to using the code?
Oh, I can't actually see that question. The first practical steps. Well, you know what I see work really, really well for charities, and I don't know what size of charity the asker of the question is, but I'll assume kind of mid to small. Is I think just start with one principle. I mean, what we couldn't change this time in the code was to make it shorter. We could make it more accessible and use simpler language and more of a focus on smaller organizations. But because the digital landscape is so complex now and there are so many more risks as well as opportunities, we couldn't kind of streamline it a lot. So I think maybe just starting with one principle. So what I sometimes do is I will work with organizations where I say, okay, if these, I think it's 8 principles we have now rather than 7, which feels like the most pressing thing for your organization. Okay, fine. So it's leadership. Let's look at the leadership principle and work out what you're doing effectively, where there are going to be some areas for development, and then let's identify some actions that come out of that. So I think just finding a way in with one area that your organization is talking about a lot already probably feels a bit more fun and engaging rather than we need to get on top of the whole code tomorrow. So that's what I would recommend. Just start with one principle, and then you'll normally find that it then leads you into a conversation about other areas of the code quite naturally, and you can just chunk it up that way.
Yeah,
What would you do,
totally.
Yoan? What would you do?
Yeah, I mean, I'd try out the AI, but
Okay,
there is, and
good
also
first step, one brand.
it's also a really good example of where the AI can be quite helpful because if there's a particular area, say you wanted to look at tech procurement, like we mentioned earlier, you could actually just type that in and to the AI, and it should give you everything that the code has mentioned because the code can be quite cumbersome, and at times I think the splitting of principles is super helpful. But if you want a particular thing, that might, like for example, tech integration, that might feature in a couple of principles. So hopefully the AI should be able to sort of take those out and give you exactly what you want. And then maybe you can cross-reference with the PDF or with the website. And then there's also the anchoring that we've done on the code website. So that's done this morning. That might be why there's a few issues, but it's just checking to make sure it was the best way for you, user-friendly, basically to improve your journey. But yeah, in the anchoring, it should take you exactly to where you want to be. So, like Zoe said, if you're going by particular principles, it's a really useful way of doing it. Yeah, and there's quite a lot of ways for you to engage in it, and I think that's the joy of it. So, however you personally engage with information, I think it should allow that journey basically. Um, yeah, I've got a question for you, Zoe. How
Okay.
so it's based on something someone mentioned earlier, and I wanted to draw it out a little bit more. But so when a lot of people were talking about the first steps towards AI, and it seemed like how do you decide on the right AI to use? Because it seems like a lot of hype around it, and I think someone mentioned that it can actually be a bit overwhelming. And reports sort of say that sometimes it can actually have a negative impact on productivity if you're picking the wrong systems. And the other thing, I mean, one of the things we mentioned in the code was it's quite hard to pick the right systems because there is so much hype and sales and everything like that. Do you have any advice for people there?
Yeah, it's such a great question. Thank you. And that's a really common one I hear from a lot of charities. Where do we begin? Well, what I'd say to that, perhaps a slight challenge, is you've probably already begun. So start with what your staff or your volunteers are doing and learn from that. So the likelihood is, given that what we know about the growth of AI adoption across the sector, someone in your organization, someone will probably be using it for meeting notes or writing emails, even if it is a really simple baby step. Just looking at talking to your staff and volunteers, saying, how are you using AI? And you might want to give them a prompt just to ask them, to suggest some of the common tools. Because what I find about all of these tools is that they're so easy to use. Sometimes people don't even realize they're using them. So I would start with what are you using? What have you learned so far? Where it might have saved people time or helped them get a better result. And then what you can do is you can create a really simple spreadsheet or some kind of shared document where you have all those different use cases and some learnings and some risks and maybe even some preferred tools. And then you'll find once you've been doing that for about a month or two, you should be able to look at that spreadsheet and to begin to prioritize. So, as an example, I know some organisations that absolutely love using AI to write funding bids, but then I have talked to others who said, well, it just doesn't work for us. And actually, we've had a better experience using AI to create a really good template for funding bids. And that then helps us pre-populate and get started. So every organisation is different, but I'd say just begin by learning from how your staff and volunteers are using these tools and starting to create that sort of shared document of the risks, the processes, the preferred tools, and then you'll find you can get to a point where you can begin to prioritize, and then that's when you can start to make some decisions about what your plan forward will look like. But that data gathering is definitely the first step.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. The other thing I would just add to that is the talking to other charities and how they've used it as well. Just because I think that's something we've seen in our conversations. That's really defined how we've been using it. If anyone has any more questions, please. Oh, there is one in the Q&A. With regards to with regards to risks and training. If someone accidentally uploads client personal identifiable information into an unpaid public generative AI such as ChatGPT, would we need some policies for reporting this, or would we need to report it to the ICO? Any way to prevent or do damage control? Another challenging question. Zoe?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I do want to say that whilst I am a digital and AI specialist, I'm not a data protection specialist. So please do check with data protection people about this. I mean, first of all, I'd say you want to try and almost preempt something like this happening. So for me, that's very much about the policy and the process and the training as well. My gut instinct, and this is very much gut instinct, is that you might need to report this, but I would get a proper answer from that from someone who specializes in data. So yeah, and I don't know whether that's something that you know about. I don't mean to put you on the spot if you're
No,
not,
no.
but do you have any thoughts on that?
I mean, the interesting thing is I actually think it's a brilliant question in the sense that I might commission an article on it.
Yeah,
Because
do it.
yeah, I
Great
mean,
idea.
I look into this stuff because the ICO, obviously we report on GDPR and stuff like that, and we're always trying to help charities in that way. But I really don't know the answer, and I'm not sure there is one, to be honest. And what I mean, of course there is one, but what I mean is I'm not sure if it's a known thing or there's known. Does anyone else in the chat know anything about this, by the way? But ultimately, I think it's something to commission on, because I think we need that knowledge in the sector. Because I mean, we talk a lot about the prevention of it, as Zoe mentioned. I don't think we've really had that discussion of what you do after it's actually, because with other data breaches, reporting is the pretty much standard, and we have procedures that we go through. I'm not too sure what you do in this instance. So yeah, I'll put it on my commissioning list. So that's good. And then we'll get one of the freelancers to dig into it and research and see what some other people are doing. So if you just check out the Cherry Digital website, it will be there in due course. So thank you.
It's such a great question. Thank you for asking that, because it's immediately got me thinking about how, suppose you left, like back in the day, like a sort of stick with a memory stick with kind of personal data on a train, or some confidential papers, or you got an email from your IT supplier saying, we've had something's gone wrong and your website's been hacked and people have got into email. They're quite obvious things, aren't they? And everyone will kind of know that that's a data breach. But if someone somewhere in your organization puts a copy of, say, your email newsletter list into actually, you might not know. That's the thing, and that is the bit for me that makes it a bit more worrying. So again, this is where I think the role of upskilling is really important. In fact, I was just with a charity this morning where we were talking about that, because there's quite a bit of AI governance that happens on the ground, as much as reporting stuff up to board level and looking at investment cases, because we're going to need to get staff and volunteers to a point where they know not to do that. And because these tools are so easy to use, it's really easy to do that potentially, isn't it? So some of this is about training and some of it is about process. It's also about how can we, I think the mitigation and the prevention probably feels even more important in a context like the one I've just described.
Yeah. And Shell's said that we were told any data breach needs to be reported, and I totally agree with that. I do
Mhm.
wonder from the ICO's perspective, or who imagine it, like Zoe said, it was far more common than a standard data breach, and it particularly if we're using AI more and more, you can imagine this would happen a lot. So it's quite a weird and a strange one to kind of unpack, especially again the degrees of data breach in that sense. Like if, for example, I put my personal information in there, they kind of already have that. So is that a data breach if I put it into the system? If you see what I mean. So yeah, a lot to think about there. Any data breach needed to be risk and impact assessment, and then the reporting and actions driven by the outcome. So yeah, Jonathan, a really helpful. Yeah, right. So basically, I think Jonathan's point is it's more about the risk or level of sort of sensitivity.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Jonathan.
Well,
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe that's a future webinar, and you get some specialists along, maybe even get the ICO along or something,
yeah,
to talk about this because there's some really knotty grey areas, aren't there?
yeah. They might be very busy, but yeah.
We're quite
Um,
busy at the moment, but
yeah.
someone somewhere I'm sure could do this really well.
Yeah, I mean, great question again. Thanks for that because it gives us something to think about from our perspective. And obviously, our job is to fill these knowledge gaps and to help people. So that's brilliant. If there's not any other questions, I think we can wrap it up. So just anyone others, I'll give it a minute. But otherwise, we got 5 minutes early and we haven't had lunch yet. So.
Oh,
Well, I had an apple. It was fine.
very healthy, very healthy.
Okay. Well, I'll say thank you so much again. Thanks, Zoe, for leading the session. And
Oh,
thank you
pleasure.
everyone for your engagement and your interaction. It was really, really good. And I really enjoyed it. And thanks for the questions. It was great. Our next webinar will be on the 3rd of July at 1 p.m. and it will be on how to master grant funding, which we talked about a little bit here. And we'll tackle some AI issues within that and how to use it. It's with Get Grants, who are experts on grant funding, and we'll share the registration link in the chat. Finally, if you have any feedback, please provide that. And again, any questions for Charity Digital, we will be happy to sort of respond. And thanks again, Zoe, for all your insight. Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you. Thank you. It was fun doing this. Thank you, Anne. And thank you, everyone. Love the questions and do keep them coming and do use the code. I hope it's really useful for you all.